Long before Homo sapiens walked the earth, another human species had already spread across Eurasia, the Neanderthals. Who were they? They weren't quite us, but they weren't so different either. They cared for their sick, buried their dead, hunted dangerous prey, and endured for hundreds of thousands of years. Through Ice Age forests, across wind-swept steppes, and over rugged mountains, they lived, loved, and survived. They had culture, they had bonds, they had stories. They were Neanderthals, and the closer we look, the more familiar they become. The first Neanderthal remains, a skull known as Engers II, were discovered in Belgium in 1829 by Dutch-Belgian prehistorian Philippe Charles Schmerling. Nearly 2 years later, in 1848, another skull was unearthed at Forbes Quarry in Gibraltar by Lieutenant Edmund Flint. However, at the time, neither find was recognized for what it truly was. Instead, these ancient bones were thought to belong to a primitive human, an individual from a low stage of civilization, not a distinct human species. It wasn't until 1856, when a partial skeleton was unearthed in the Neander Valley of Germany, that the pieces began to fall into place. Discovered by local quarrymen, the skull from the find, known as Feldhofer I, was examined by Johann Karl Vollroth and Hermann Schaffhausen. The other fossils included parts of the rib, pelvis, leg, arm, and other bones. Vollroth quickly recognized that these remains belonged to a previously unknown type of human, unlike anything seen before. In 1864, Irish geologist William King made it official. This was a distinct species of ancient human. He gave it a name, Homo neanderthalensis. Since then, fossilized remains of over 300 Neanderthals have been discovered. Neanderthal anatomy is characterized by a long, flat skull and stocky body plan. The Neanderthal skull is distinctive by thick, rounded brow ridges, large eye sockets and nose, and an occipital bun at the back of the skull. The jaws and teeth are strong, which may have been a response to heavy use of using their teeth as tools for tasks like gripping, tearing, or processing tough materials, in addition to chewing hard, abrasive foods like raw meat. The body is typically short and stocky, with an average size of 5 foot 5 inches and 78 kilograms for males, and 5 foot 1 inches and 66 kilograms for females. The tallest Neanderthal individual discovered so far is Amund I, found in modern-day Israel, who stood at 5 foot 10 inches tall. Using 78 kilograms, the body mass index for Neanderthal males was calculated to be 26.9 to 28.2, which in modern humans correlates to being overweight, but obviously Neanderthals were not fat. This indicates a very robust build. Neanderthals' short, stocky limbs is a trait traditionally seen as a hyperarctic adaptation to cold climates. This compact body shape helps conserve heat and is also observed in modern cold-adapted populations like the Inuit Siberian Yupik. To survive the harsh environments of Ice Age Europe and Asia, Neanderthals evolved several cold-specific adaptations, including efficient body fat storage and a large nasal cavity, which may have helped warm and humidify cold, dry air. Remarkably, their version of the LEPR gene, linked to fat storage and heat production, is similar to that found in woolly mammoths, suggesting it was an adaptation for a cold climate. Interestingly, Neanderthals retained this physique even in milder regions, like Iberia, suggesting their build served more than just climate adaptation. Some researchers propose that their short limbs, plus a powerful respiratory system, and abundance of fast-twitch muscle fibers may also point to adaptations for sprinting. Neanderthals were probably not as adept at endurance running as modern humans, but had explosive sprint speed, ideal for ambush hunting in rugged terrain. Neanderthals also had shorter thumbs and index fingers, but maintained dexterity with bone trauma indicating a strong squeezing grip. Like modern humans, they typically favored their right hand. The Neanderthal brain case averages 1,640 cubic centimeters for males and 1,460 cubic centimeters for females, which is significantly larger than the averages for all groups of humans today. For example, recent European males average about 1,350 cubic centimeters and females 1,200 cubic centimeters. But a larger brain does not necessarily mean greater intelligence. Neanderthals were physically larger and more robust than modern humans, and much of their increased brain volume likely supported the control of their bigger bodies. A study by researchers at Oxford University suggests that a greater portion of the Neanderthal brain was devoted to visual processing, twice the space compared to that of modern humans. This adaptation may have evolved because Neanderthals lived at higher latitudes, where long, dark winters meant less sunlight. As a result, their brains developed enhanced visual systems, particularly in the occipital lobe at the back of the brain. By contrast, early Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, where bright, consistent daylight may have allowed for a different balance in brain structure, favoring social and cognitive complexity over enhanced visual processing. Where Neanderthals evolved and who they descended from is something we have strong evidence for. It's clear that Neanderthals evolved in Europe, descending from European populations of Homo heidelbergensis, a species that lived across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia between roughly 700,000 and 300,000 years ago. Key fossil evidence comes from the site of Cima de los Huesos in northern Spain, also known as the Pit of Bones. The remains found there, dated to around 430,000 years ago, show transitional traits between Homo heidelbergensis and early Neanderthals. Specifically, some skulls exhibit features that are neither strictly heidelbergensis nor fully developed Neanderthal, suggesting an intermediate stage in their evolutionary lineage, marking what many scientists consider the beginning of the Neanderthal lineage. In 2016, advancements in technology allowed the extraction of nuclear DNA from Cima fossils, marking it one of the oldest hominin DNA samples ever sequenced. The nuclear DNA analysis confirmed that the Cima hominins were indeed the ancestors of Neanderthals. Many scientists often refer to these as proto-Neanderthals. Neanderthals share close genetic ties with both ourselves and another ancient human who inhabited a wide area across eastern and southern Asia, the Denisovans. Neanderthals and Denisovans share a closer genetic relationship with each other than either does with modern humans. Neanderthals and modern humans diverged from a common ancestor between approximately 600,000 to 805,000 years ago, after which Neanderthals and Denisovans diverged from each other about 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. Until about 40,000 years ago, these three groups existed in parallel, occasionally met, and exchanged genes. In the Altai region of Central Asia and Siberia, the Neanderthal genome has roughly 0.5 to 0.9% of his genetic makeup derived from Denisovans. The discovery of Denny, a 90,000-year-old first-generation hybrid from Denisova Cave, provides direct evidence of Neanderthal-Denisovan interbreeding. Genomic analysis of Denny reveals a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, indicating gene flow between these groups in that region. Although Neanderthals and Denisovans are indeed more closely related, the Neanderthal Y chromosome is surprisingly more similar to that of modern humans than to Denisovans. Researchers propose this similarity arose from early encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, potentially as far back as 250,000 to 370,000 years ago, much earlier than previously thought. These interactions may have involved an ancestral human species or an early wave of Homo sapiens migrating from Africa to Eurasia. Although those ancient sapiens populations left no modern descendants, at least one male Homo sapiens fathered hybrid sons with a Neanderthal woman, introducing a Homo sapiens Y chromosome into the Neanderthal gene pool. This Y chromosome appears in all Neanderthal males sequenced to date. A July 2024 study in Science, led by Princeton's Joshua Key, revealed through ancient DNA analysis not only that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred earlier and more often than previously thought, but Neanderthals inherited up to 10% of their genome from modern humans, particularly Neanderthals of around 200,000 years ago. This percentage decreased over time, with later Neanderthal genomes showing an average of 2.5% to 3.7% modern human DNA. This human to Neanderthal gene flow is a significant finding, as earlier research focused primarily on Neanderthal DNA in modern humans. While the study itself does not explicitly state what role modern human DNA played in Neanderthals, it does note that the introgressed sequences had significant impacts on the Neanderthal genome. Further research would be needed to confirm the role of these genes in Neanderthal development. The data also confirms interbreeding occurred in multiple waves, over 200,000 years ago, around 105,000 to 120,000 years ago, and 45,000 to 60,000 years ago. Neanderthals had a relatively small and isolated population, with estimates suggesting a total population size of tens of thousands, never exceeding that number, although they had a wide geographical range, inhabiting Eurasia, from Western Europe to the Altai Mountains in Siberia. They lived in small groups of only 5 to 30 individuals, in contrast to the larger groups of Homo sapiens of 25 to 100, sometimes up to 150 individuals. However, the discovery of a large 125,000-year-old elephant kill site in Germany suggests Neanderthals could have lived in larger groups, potentially big enough to hunt and process an entire elephant. Estimates suggests there may have been 60 individuals in this group, so perhaps they were capable of living in large groups. The same site also has evidence that Neanderthals may have reshaped part of the landscape, clearing trees to create a more open environment in which to live. But genetic and physical evidence points mostly to Neanderthals living in groups not exceeding 30 individuals. Factors like food availability, climate, and the need for cooperative hunting would have influenced group size dynamics. According to a 2009 DNA analysis study, Neanderthals can be divided into 3 distinct subgroups, one in Western Europe, another in the southern area near the Mediterranean, and a third in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. They even hinted a fourth one in Western Asia, but didn't confirm it in the study. These groups may have some degree of interbreeding and migration, but there was also significant genetic differences between them, including differences in teeth, skull shape, and bone thickness. However, the computer simulations they used to analyze DNA sequence fragments came from only 12 Neanderthal fossils, so whilst this study is plausible, it is not definitive. A Neanderthal, nicknamed Thorin, found in the Grottomandaran cave, has a genome sequence revealing a previously unknown lineage that were isolated for over 50,000 years with no outside contact. This finding also contradicts the notion of a single, homogeneous Neanderthal population, suggesting that these populations were more diverse and fragmented than previously thought. Thorin's genome showed characteristics more similar to ancient Neanderthals of 105,000 years ago than to other Neanderthals of the same period. Research suggests that it was Neanderthal women that often left their home groups to join their partners in other communities, while men tended to remain in their birth groups. This pattern is indicated by the higher genetic diversity of mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the female line, compared to Y chromosome DNA, which is passed down the male line within Neanderthal populations. In a sample of 206 Neanderthals, based on the abundance of young and mature adults in comparison to other age demographics, about 80% of them, above the age of 20, died before reaching 40. This high mortality rate was probably due to their high-stress environment. Infant mortality was estimated to have been very high for Neanderthals, with evidence suggesting about 43% in northern Eurasia. At Chakaskaya Cave, in the Siberian Altai Mountains, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 6 adults and 5 children, among them a father, his daughter, and their cousins, all of whom appear to have died from starvation. The discovery offers a poignant glimpse into the harsh and unforgiving reality of Neanderthal life. As touched on earlier, Neanderthals inhabited a vast range, stretching from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the Altai Mountains of Siberia in the east, and from the Mediterranean south to northern Europe, including parts of modern-day Britain. This wide distribution meant they lived in a variety of environments, from temperate forests and coastal zones to steppe and tundra landscapes. Before 150,000 years ago, confirmed Neanderthal fossils are rare. Many earlier sites are attributed to Homo heidelbergensis or transitional forms, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly when Neanderthals first appeared in specific environments. Additionally, coastal sites from this early period are often underwater due to sea level rise, limiting our understanding of their use of marine resources. Open-air sites also tend to preserve poorly compared to cave systems. Still, a few key sites offer glimpses into early Neanderthal habitats. At Cima de los Huesos, Spain, 430,000 years ago, the fossils of the proto-Neanderthals are found in a cave system which were surrounded by a mix of forest and open landscapes. Faunal remains of bears and deer, along with pollen, indicate a temperate climate. In Steinem, Germany, 300,000 years ago, a proto-Neanderthal skull was found in a ravine environment, surrounded by temperate woodlands and fauna also suited to mild climates. Most of what we know about Neanderthal environments comes from the past 130,000 years, a period when their remains become much more widespread. During marine isotope stage 5, or MIS5, which lasted from 130,000 to 71,000 years ago, was a relatively warm interglacial period. And Neanderthals thrived in forested regions, particularly in Western and Southern Europe. Judicious and mixed forests provided ample plant resources and game, such as deer. It was during this time, 125,000 years ago, hippos were splashing about the Thames and lions roamed the hills of what is now Hampstead Heath, London. We know Neanderthals were already present in parts of Europe at this time, and imagining them sharing the landscape with such creatures is undeniably fascinating. However, no Neanderthal remains from this exact period have been found this far north, so it's likely they weren't in Britain at this time. Still, the idea of Neanderthals living in a lush, almost exotic Ice Age Britain, alongside animals we now associate with Africa, sparks the imagination. During MIS4, 71,000 to 57,000 years ago, the climate cooled and dried. Steppe and tundra expanded, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. Neanderthals adapted to these open, harsher environments, hunting large Ice Age megafauna on the steppes. The last stage when Neanderthals were still extant was MIS3, which lasted from 57,000 to 29,000 years ago. This period saw frequent climate fluctuations. Neanderthals persisted in a wide range of habitats: steppe tundras, shrublands, grasslands, woodlands, river valleys, and coastal zones. It's during this time that they began overlapping with early Homo sapiens in Europe. Evidence from a tooth found in the Rhone Valley, France, indicating modern humans had arrived by around 54,000 years ago. A 2023 study, the Ecological Evaluation of the Development of Neanderthal Niche Exploration by Dr. Attila Treasure, points to Neanderthals favoring areas with a mix of forests, grasslands and shrublands, which offered diverse resources. These were common in river valleys and lowlands. Neanderthals coped with a range of climates, from mild, humid conditions in interglacials in MIS5 to cold, dry conditions in glacial periods. This highlights their resilience to temperature fluctuations, though they tended to avoid extremely cold regions, preferring mean annual temperatures above -10 degrees. Precipitation also influenced their distribution, with a preference for regions receiving 400 to 1,200 millimeters of annual rainfall, supporting productive ecosystems. Neanderthals favored low to mid elevation areas below 1,000 meters, such as river valleys and plains, which provided shelter like caves and access to water and game. Coastal areas, particularly in southern Europe, were significant, with evidence of marine resource exploitation where they seemed to be collecting and eating plenty of shellfish. Archaeological and environmental data identify core areas of Neanderthal habitation, particularly in France, Germany, and parts of southern Europe, where stable climates and rich ecosystems supported long-term occupation. In contrast, regions like Britain and the eastern Eurasian steppes were occupied more sporadically, likely during favorable climate windows. Archaeological evidence gives us valuable insight into Neanderthal behavior, particularly through the tools they left behind. Tools primarily associated with Neanderthals are from the Mousterian tool industry, named after the Le Moustier site in France, also associated with modern humans. These evolved from Acheulean tools, which hominins had been using since 1.76 million years ago. The difference is they adapted the Levallois technique for more efficient core preparation and flake removal. This technique produced smaller, sharper tools, like knives and scrapers, from carefully shaped stone cores. It required striking rocks at precise spots to detach desired flakes. While making them doesn't require fine or precise craftsmanship, the process is still challenging. In fact, until the final blow, the tool only exists in the mind of the toolmaker, so it demands considerable foresight and cognitive ability. The main tool they produced was the hand axe. This tool was very versatile, used for butchering, scraping, and cutting, the Swiss Army knife of its day. Their tools remained largely unchanged for over 100,000 years. Near the end of their existence, Neanderthals developed more sophisticated tools, some of which were similar to those used by early modern humans during the same period. This Upper Paleolithic technology, referred to as the Chapelle-Perronian industry, required much planning and precision to produce. The industry produced denticulate stone tools for sawing and plant processing, particularly of grassy plants, and a distinctive flint knife with a single cutting edge and a blunt curved back. Château-Perronian assemblages from the Grotte de Rennes and Saint-Césaire archaeological sites in France have yielded well-identified Neanderthal remains, so it seems they were using these tools. However, there's been vigorous debate as to whether the Neanderthals actually made these items, or if they were stolen from anatomically modern humans. Recent evidence suggests that they were produced by Neanderthals, but only after modern humans introduced these behaviors, suggesting there was some cultural exchange. During their time on Earth, Neanderthals crafted a wide variety of tools, each adapted for specific tasks related to food preparation, hunting, clothing, and craftsmanship. Scrapers, for example, were used to remove meat and fat from animal hides, which then helped produce loose-fitting clothing and shelter. These same tools could also be used for woodworking, shaping bone and sharpening spears. Hand axes, with their sharp edges, were also multi-purpose tools used to butcher animals, process hides, and dig for roots. Though primarily utilitarian, such tools may have also served as weapons for hunting or defense. Some theories even suggest that the flat sides of the hand axe could be used to strike sparks with iron pyrites, a common sulfide mineral found in a wide variety of rock types, to start fires. Awls, pointed tools used to pierce holes in hides, allowed Neanderthals to stitch materials together using sinews or other fibers, aiding in hide and garment making and potentially leatherworking. Burins, with their sharp chisel-like tips, were used for engraving and carving bone or antler, playing a key role in the creation in tools like spears. Articulate tools, distinguished by their notched edges, may have functioned as saws or for straightening wooden shafts. Hunting tools include most famously wooden spears, some with stone or bone tips for both thrusting and short-distance throwing. These were their favored hunting weapons. The spears allowed them to kill animals from a distance, as evidenced by impact scars on stone tips and the ability of the spears to penetrate flesh. Excavation at Neanderthal sites, such as the Canadil-Liago cave in France and the Figueira Brava cave in Portugal, have uncovered fish bones, including those of freshwater and marine species, alongside Neanderthal tools dated to around 300,000 to 40,000 years ago. And while no definitive fishing tools like nets, hooks, or harpoons have been conclusively identified, we know that Neanderthals used pointed tools, such as wooden spears or bone points, which could have been adapted for spearing their fish. Overall, many of these Neanderthal tools mentioned were incredibly versatile and used for a wide range of tasks. According to a study done by the University of Southampton in England, two distinct Neanderthal cultures can be identified by tool-making industries: the Zagros Mousterian and the Eastern Mikokian. Dr. Karen Rubens from the Center for the Archaeological of Human Origins analyzed 1,300 Neanderthal stone tools from 80 sites in France, Germany, Belgium, Britain, and the Netherlands, revealing two distinct cultural traditions from 115,000 years ago until their extinction. In southwestern France and Britain, Neanderthals made symmetrical, triangle, and heart-shaped hand axes, while in Germany and eastern regions, they crafted asymmetrical bifacial knives. Belgium and northern France were a transition zone, showing contact and ideas exchanged between groups, reflected in varied tool designs. These interactions suggest cultural mixing between these Neanderthal groups. The discovery of these distinct cultures highlights the diversity of Neanderthal life and demonstrates that they were not a monolithic group with a single culture. One of the most striking discoveries the Neanderthals left behind for us to see is their use of multi-component adhesives, showcasing their ability to engineer materials for specific purposes. At the site of Les Moustières in France, 40,000-year-old stone tools were found with traces of glue made from ochre and bitumen, mixed in a precise ratio to create a non-sticky handle for gripping without adhering to the hand. This adhesive, requiring ochre content exceeding 50%, was a deliberate innovation, as air-dried bitumen alone loses adhesive properties when mixed with such high proportions of ochre. The effort to source these materials from distant regions further suggests advanced planning and resource management, indicating that Neanderthals valued these tools highly and invested significant effort in their creation. More than 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals living at the modern site of Abry-du-Maras in the Rhône River Valley of southeastern France made what is the earliest known piece of string. The string was made of 3 separate strands of fiber taken from the inner bark of a coniferous tree. The bark fibers would have been harvested in the spring or early summer, soaked in water, and separated into strands. The strands were then twisted in a clockwise direction to hold the fibers together, after which they were twisted together in a counterclockwise motion to make the cord. Crafting such a cordage requires mathematical reasoning, including knowledge of pairs, sets, and numerosity, hinting at cognitive abilities previously thought exclusive to modern humans. The potential applications of this cord, ranging from clothing to nets and bags, suggests a complex material culture that extended far beyond durable artifacts like stone and bone. Neanderthals may have even passed on a few innovations to our Homo sapien ancestors. Recent analysis shows that Neanderthals were using specialized bone tools, called lissoirs, to process animal hides several thousands of years before modern humans arrived in Europe and began crafting similar tools. This suggests that Neanderthals invented lissoirs independently rather than borrowing the idea from Homo sapiens. Lissoirs, made from deer ribs, were likely used to soften, strengthen, and waterproof hides. The tools featured a tapered, round tip that has been ground smooth and polished on one side, while the other side remained raw and unmodified. Intact, they would have measured around 20 to 40 centimeters in length. Although it was long assumed that modern humans pioneered this kind of tool use, evidence like this suggests that Neanderthals were more innovative and sophisticated in their craftsmanship than previously believed. Neanderthals are perhaps best known for their big game hunting, and perhaps rightly so. These ancient humans were skilled hunters. Many archaeological sites show their ability to kill large mammals like bison, horse, red deer, mammoth, rhinoceros, lion, and many more. This could not have been easy, since we have not found evidence that the Neanderthals used arrows, atlatls, or other distance-killing weapons invented by more recent humans. In the face of these apparent technological limitations, we know, thanks to analysis of many Neanderthal bones and teeth, that they still got more than half their nutritional input from meat. Their weaponry may have been limited compared to later peoples, but their deep understanding of animal behavior and the surrounding landscape gave them a crucial edge. Evidence from 5 well-documented kill sites across France, Germany, and Poland reveals a sophisticated approach to hunting a range of large animals, including bison, horses, rhinoceroses, reindeer, and aurochs. These sites dated between 120,000 and 50,000 years ago, offering compelling case studies of Neanderthal hunting practices. Together, These sites form a compelling series of case studies that illustrate the sophistication of Neanderthal hunting methods. At Le Bord in France, for instance, excavations in 1971 uncovered the remains of more than 40 aurochs. The concentration and placement of the bones suggest that Neanderthals may have had coordinated group hunts, driving the animals into confined spaces where they could be more easily killed. The site at Le Bord, France, was once a collapsed cave known as an avon, forming a natural depression at the base of a sloping hill. Most of the aurochs' remains uncovered there belonged to young animals and adult cows, with few or no adult bulls. Aurochs, now extinct, likely lived in matriarchal herds of cows and calves, while mature bulls roamed separately in bachelor groups. Researchers believe Neanderthals deliberately targeted these cow-calf herds, herding them into the avon where escape would have been difficult. Driving wild animals into a confined space repeatedly is no easy feat. It likely required a deep understanding of herd behavior and strategic coordination. Neanderthals may have approached the herd at an angle to gently steer the lead animals, gradually narrowing their path and funneling them into the trap, working together in a synchronized effort. At Moran, another French site, archaeologists found the remains of more than 130 bison accumulated over time. The location was naturally suited for a kill site, bordered by a limestone rock face and marshy terrain. These natural barriers would have made it difficult for the bison to escape. Interestingly, 80% of the bones belonged to juveniles or adult females, suggesting that Neanderthals may have deliberately targeted these less defensive individuals, perhaps during seasonal migrations. In Talbach, Germany, the hunting scene was quite different. Neanderthals hunted rhinoceroses that came to drink and wallow at warm springs during the last interglacial, about 120,000 years ago. Hidden in natural brush, the hunters observed rhino mothers and calves. They waited for the calves to stray from their mothers before attacking, likely a safer and more manageable strategy. Of the 76 rhinoceroses documented at the site, 40 were juveniles, aged between 1 to 1.5 years. Archaeological analysis shows cut marks on every part of the skeleton, a sign that the Neanderthals had control of the kill site for plenty of time before carnivores could ravage the remains, once again showcasing impressive strategic coordination. Evidence at Rio Secco and Fumane caves in northern Italy between 50,000 to 43,000 years ago suggests Neanderthals ambushed ancient bears twice the size of grizzlies just as they were waking from hibernation, then stole their caves. Researchers studying more than 1,700 prehistoric bear bones found evidence of cooking, as well as bite marks that matched Neanderthal teeth. Further up north, researchers have even found evidence of the earliest example of lion hunting yet known, based on a close forensic analysis of a cave lion skeleton found in Germany that shows evidence of injury by a wooden spear some 48,000 years ago. The cut marks also show that not only did they kill this apex predator, they also consumed its meat. In the same country, at the Neumark Nord site, there is even evidence of regular hunting of straight-tusked elephants, approximately 125,000 years ago. Cooperative hunting is not unique to humans. Lions and wolves also use terrain to their advantage, coordinating ambushes by driving prey towards hidden group members. Neanderthals may have observed these behaviors in the wild, perhaps even adapting some techniques. But unlike four-legged predators, Neanderthals lacked the speed. They had to rely on planning, patience, and cooperation. Where wolves separate a single animal and run it down, Neanderthals excelled at strategy. Their success depended on multiple individuals committing to a shared plan, sometimes without being able to see or hear each other. They used their knowledge of prey behavior to steer animals into pre-selected kill zones, sometimes waiting to startle them only at the last possible moment. At Le Bord, for instance, at least 2 or 3 individuals would have been required to maneuver the herd correctly. Meanwhile, others waited in ambush, concealed and ready to strike at close quarters with thrusting spears. Some Neanderthals may have even built blinds, camouflage structures made from branches, rocks, or vegetation to conceal themselves from approaching prey. While such structures rarely leave archaeological traces, they would be consistent with hunting methods used by traditional societies worldwide. In some cases, hiding behind natural cover alone may have been adequate. Also, Neanderthal bodies were exceptionally well suited, more so than ours, for quick, close-range ambush hunting. Their skeletal structure reveals a physique built for power and explosive speed. With shorter limbs and stocky frames, they possess strong, fast-twitch muscle fibers ideal for sudden bursts of movement. These traits suggest adaptations not for endurance running, but for sprinting, especially useful in forested environments or areas where cover was abundant and stealth was key. Such landscapes allowed Neanderthals to remain hidden until the final moment, launching powerful surprise attacks on their prey. More remarkable evidence suggests Neanderthals weren't just land-based hunters, they also exploited the sea. At Figueira Brava, a coastal cave in Portugal, Neanderthals living between 106,000 and 86,000 years ago dined on a surprising array of marine life, including sharks, dolphins, and seals, alongside smaller prey like mussels, crabs, eels, and fish. While the larger critters were likely scavenged from the shore, the smaller shellfish and marine creatures may have been collected from tidal pools during low tide. Their methods may not have been complicated, but the Neanderthals at Figueira Brava seem to have had an understanding of tidal patterns and possibly some of the risks associated with seafood consumption, as phytoplankton blooms during warmer months can cause shellfish to become toxic. A study led by researchers at the University of Barcelona found that marine foods made up roughly 50% of the Figueira Brava Neanderthals. Incredibly, some layers of the cave contained over 800 pounds of shells per cubic meter, suggesting they gathered shellfish in large quantities, perhaps using blankets or bags to carry back to the cave, which at the time was located about a mile inland, unlike today, where the cave sits right on the coast due to changes in sea level. Certain Neanderthal skulls even show signs of surfer's ear, which are bone growths formed by the ear caused by exposure to moist environments, suggesting that Neanderthals were diving underwater for food, foraging, or possibly leisure time. Even though Neanderthals were apex predators of their time, life was far from easy. They shared their world with formidable carnivores: bears, lions, leopards, hyenas, and wolves. And sometimes they weren't the hunters, but the hunted. Evidence shows that hyenas scavenged Neanderthal remains and may have actively preyed on vulnerable individuals. Bears too likely clashed with Neanderthals, especially given the competition for cave shelters and other resources. In a cave in Valencia, Spain, skull fragments from a Neanderthal child bear bite marks consistent with an attack by a large carnivorous cat, likely a lion or hyena. While Neanderthals are known to have hunted lions, it's likely that the danger worked both ways. These predators were not just rivals, but potentially lethal threats. Neanderthals had to compete fiercely for territory, prey, and shelter, often facing direct conflict with powerful animals. Injured, young, or isolated individuals were particularly at risk. For all their strength and skill, Neanderthals lived in a world where being at the top of the food chain didn't guarantee safety. We know that Neanderthals hunted and ate large game, but remains found in Neanderthal caves tell us they also consumed rabbits, hares, birds, tortoises, small reptiles, maggots, and many more little game they could get their hands on. We can tell a fair bit of what Neanderthal bodies required from within the body itself. The Neanderthal bell-shaped ribcage is famously much wider than that of modern humans. Anthropologist Mickey Ben-Dor of Tel Aviv University in Israel has suggested that Neanderthals developed these large torsos over millennia to house livers and kidneys that had enlarged to cope with high levels of protein. Interestingly, some traditional Arctic populations, such as the Inuit, who sometimes subsist on an all-meat diet, have larger kidneys and correspondingly longer ribs than average Europeans, which seems to back up Ben-Dor's theory. It has also been estimated by scientists that Neanderthals required a whopping 3,500 to 5,000 calories a day to get by, and up to 7,000 in harsher environments. So it seems that Neanderthals would have needed a significant time and effort devoted to hunting, gathering, and processing resources. Along with Neanderthal body requirements and animal remains alongside known Neanderthal sites, much of the information we know about the Neanderthals comes from dental calculus, which is hardened tooth plaque that can contain microscopic plant and microbial remains, and even trace DNA. Tooth plaque is the most durable substance in the human body, which can last up to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, and Neanderthal teeth have become a rich source of information. Research conducted at the Gorham Cave Complex highlights that Neanderthals regularly targeted small game, including rabbits and hares. 80% of the bones found in the caves are those of rabbits, which would have been abundant in the coastal sand dunes. The Neanderthals also exploited Gibraltar's location as one of Europe's focal points for migratory birds, by catching and eating them in large quantities, including plenty of pigeon and chough. In all, 145 bird species, representing a quarter of Europe's total, are represented in the finds from the caves, making them the richest site for fossil bird remains anywhere in Europe. While we do not know their specific hunting methods, researchers imply Neanderthals used opportunistic strategies suited to the local ecology. Pigeons and choughs, which nest on cliff ledges and cave entrances, were likely captured by hand with snares, or by exploiting their predictable roosting habits. The evidence from Gibraltar's caves shows that the Neanderthals occupied the peninsula on and off for at least 100,000 years. We know that meat was the primary staple of the Neanderthal diet, but it wasn't all they ate. A significant portion of their food still came from other sources. So what exactly were Neanderthals eating on the side? Studies of these bone isotopes have shown Neanderthals in northern Europe got 80 to 90% of their protein from animals, which is up there with the wolves and hyenas. Not many things edible from the animal remains were left either. Tiny cuts show us brains, tongues and eyeballs were targeted. But in warmer, more resource-rich regions further south, their menu was more varied. Researchers looking at the DNA and plaque from Neanderthal remains at the Spanish site of El Cedrón found evidence that they were eating mushrooms, pine nuts and moss, with no indication of meat in their diet at all, making these the first vegetarian Neanderthal group ever discovered. Preserved Pleistocene vegetation is rare, but scraps found in charred hearths in Kabara Cave in Israel include acorn, pistachio and other nuts, as well as figs, dates, grapes, olives, peas and radishes. Sites like Shanidar Cave in the Near East, where several individuals show evidence of eating fruits such as date palms before their demise, to Krapina in Croatia, where the wear found on the teeth of the Neanderthals suggested that foraging edible vegetation was a key part of this community's lifestyle. Neanderthals were expert hunters, but they were expert gatherers too. The mention of the Krapina cave in Croatia also leads us onto a more infamous aspect associated with Neanderthals, that they were cannibals. Krapina itself has been studied for more than 100 years, and Neanderthal remains discovered here include a lot of defleshing marks, leading early scholars to claim that this was a sign of cannibalism in the community. Cannibalism was also found at the site of El Cedro in Spain, but to be fair, cannibalism wasn't unique to Neanderthals. It's a behavior seen throughout human history, including among our own species. When faced with true starvation, you don't know what you would do. All this evidence suggests that Neanderthals, just like modern humans, tended to eat whatever they could find in any given season. Depending on when and where they were living, that might have meant a diet of meat or plants, or often both. The earliest evidence of regular and controlled fire use by Neanderthals dates back to around 400,000 to 300,000 years ago. However, because of the degradation of materials over such vast timescales, the archaeological record becomes much clearer at sites less than 100,000 years old, where fire use appears far more frequent and well established. It was only about 15 years ago that the consensus was that Neanderthals could only get fire from natural occurring wildfires and containing it. But modern evidence suggests Neanderthals were able to make fire on a large scale with the aid of pyrite and hand axes. This means they could decide when and where they wanted fire and were not dependent on natural fire. They did so by striking a piece of pyrite, a mineral that contains iron, with flint tools. Flints with higher silica content and finer grain structure produced more and hotter sparks, suggesting Neanderthals selected specific flint types for firemaking. Dutch archaeological professor Wil Roebrouweks of the University of Leiden suggests that the European Neanderthals were not only capable of making fire, but were just as skilled at using it as modern humans. According to Roebrouweks, evidence shows that Neanderthals were producing birch bark pitch with the help of fire tens of thousands of years before humans at Pinnacle Point in South Africa used fire for tool making. After finding unusually large numbers of chunks of manganese dioxide at the Pech de la Zee site in France in 2006, Professor Roebrouweks proposed that Neanderthals would have used the black mineral not for body decoration or art, traditionally imagined uses for the material, but for creating fires. Manganese dioxide, commonly used today in fireworks, lowers the ignition temperature of wood from 350 degrees Celsius to 250 degrees Celsius, meaning that sprinkling a bit of the mineral onto a pile of tinder makes it easier to start a fire. Neanderthals used fire for a number of things, including cooking, light, keeping warm, and deterring predators. At El Cidrón, Spain, evidence points to Neanderthals cooking and consuming red deer and wild boar. Charred bones and cut marks on these species' remains were found in fire pits, indicating butchery and roasting. As Neanderthals had no pots and pans, it's suggested they may have used animal skins, folded to create a pouch, or birch bark trays to hold and roast their food. Some researchers even speculate that they boiled their food to make it more digestible and extract the fat. Thought to be about 70,000 years old, charred remains of pulse-rich food from the Shanidar caves include nuts and grasses that were often combined with pulses such as lentils and wild mustard. Researchers have even tried to recreate the recipes using the same seeds gathered from nearby the caves. The result was a kind of pancake flatbread with a nutty flavor that was reportedly quite tasty and easy to eat. At the site of Figueira Brava, Portugal, around 90,000 years ago, Neanderthals were roasting and eating shellfish. Cooking food rather than eating it raw makes it not only safer, but a lot easier to digest, so that we can extract more energy from it. This extra energy, among other things, is thought to have enabled ancient humans to grow bigger brains. Neanderthals also made fires for warmth and deterrence from external threats. In a number of caves, evidence of hearths has been detected. The Abric Romani rock shelter in Spain indicates 8 evenly spaced hearths lined up against the rock wall, likely used to stay warm while sleeping. Plenty of archaeological sites around Eurasia with hearths and large amounts of ash suggest that Neanderthals kept fires going constantly. This helped them survive the harsh winters and stay warm during other cold periods. Neanderthals also likely considered air circulation when making hearths, as a lack of proper ventilation for a single hearth can render a cave uninhabitable in several minutes. Their knowledge of fire was a big reason as to why they managed to stay alive for hundreds of thousands of years whilst living in harsh, often freezing environments. Braving the cold weather required Neanderthals to have robust bodies and the ability to harness fire. But what about clothing? Did they wear it? Indirect evidence suggests that Neanderthals living in cold regions almost certainly dressed themselves head to toe in leather and furs. However, we've never actually found Neanderthal clothing or clothing remnants, but that's because the natural material it would have been made from does not preserve well at all. For example, the oldest piece of clothing ever found is the Tarkan dress, a linen garment discovered in Egypt that is just 5,300 years old. But there is circumstantial evidence. A stone scraper from the side of Neumarkt Nord in Germany had a small amount of residue on it, which likely got stuck during the hide processing 200,000 years ago. The residue contained acid from oak bark, which can be used to tan or preserve animal skins. It's unclear whether this residue was left from producing clothing or fur bedding. Either way, it shows that Neanderthals knew how to make what they needed to survive the cold. Stone and bone awls from late Neanderthal sites also suggests these ancient people crafted tools specifically to attach hides together for clothing or shelter. Another indicator is the front teeth of essentially all Neanderthals are worn down far more than their back teeth. which means they use their mouths to hold and manipulate objects, not just to eat. This dental wear in Neanderthals is similar to that of contemporary Inuit people, who use their teeth to soften animal hides to make clothing. The oldest direct evidence of Neanderthal fiber technology is a 3-ply cord fragment stuck to a stone tool from a site in southeastern France talked of earlier. Although cords and ropes can be used to create nets, baskets and snares, they can also be turned into shoes and fabric. One unexplored research topic, according to Sarah Lacey, a biological anthropologist at the University of Delaware, is the evidence of frostbite in Neanderthals. Frostbite can be a problem even for contemporary people who live in the Arctic. If Neanderthals weren't wearing clothes, wouldn't we expect to find amputated fingers, toes, and noses considering they lived in below freezing conditions? As there is no widespread evidence of frostbite in Neanderthal skeletons, this supports the idea that they were wearing hand and foot protection. While most researchers agreed that Neanderthals wore clothing, the exact style and construction remained debated. It's likely they wore simple garments, such as loincloths or loose-fitting cloaks made from animal hides and furs, perhaps even early versions of parkas, trousers, and boots adapted for cold climates. Neanderthal infants may have been swaddled in fur coverings when not held close to a caregiver, offering warmth and protection. Along with clothes, we know that Neanderthals created and wore some amazing jewellery. White-tailed eagle talons from the Krapina Neanderthal site in present-day Croatia, dating to approximately 130,000 years ago, may have been part of a necklace or bracelet. They were also found to have harvested feathers from birds of prey and corvids, appearing to have preference for birds with dark or black plumage. Species represented at the site include ravens, crows, rooks, magpies, jackdaws, various types of eagle and vulture, red and black kites, kestrels, and falcons. Cut marks on the wings where there is no meat suggest that these feathers weren't being removed for food, so the only explanation left is that they were using these feathers for personal adornment. Ravens in particular seem to be the popular choice. Shells found at Grotta di Fumane in Italy, dated to 45,000 years ago, were found modified and coated in ochre, suggesting they were used as a pendant or personal ornament. Other modified shell beads, this time 115,000 years old, from Cueva Anton, were possibly strung together to make a necklace. Pierced animal teeth and worked ivory have been found at Neanderthal sites, such as the Grotte du Renne cave in France. These artifacts demonstrate Neanderthals' ability to manipulate materials, create decorative items, and potentially express personal identity or group affiliation. Neanderthals and modern humans may have shared jewelry design ideas, as evidenced by strikingly similar ornaments found at archaeological sites. The artifacts on the left are jewelry and bone tools from Bako Kiro cave in Bulgaria, created by Homo sapiens about 45,000 years ago. The artifacts on the right are slightly more recent jewelry and bone tools created by Neanderthals and found in Grotte du Rhône in France. Among the discoveries are artifacts crafted from 23 different animal species, including pendants made from cave bear teeth, as well as items fashioned from red deer and bison remains. Both sets of artifacts suggest a shared capacity for symbolic expression and tool-making between the two hominin species. Evidence of trade with Neanderthals seems to be that they didn't engage in complex, large-scale trade like later modern humans, but there's enough evidence suggesting they did participate in limited exchange of goods and raw materials. A 2011 study, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, examined the transport of flint in Neanderthal contexts, suggesting the presence of exchange networks. The study analyzed flint artifacts from various sites in France and Italy, finding evidence of long-distance transport of specific flint types. This movement of raw materials, beyond what could be explained by individual mobility, pointed towards the possibility of Neanderthals engaging in exchange with other groups. The non-local materials, like flint and obsidian, were found far from their geological sources, sometimes up to 300 kilometers away. Marine shells, like those found at sites in Italy at Grotta di Fumane, were transported far inland, further indicating Neanderthal potential trade or social exchange. It's generally conceded that Neanderthal long-distance networks would have been significantly hindered by their smaller group size and general population compared to later Cro-Magnons, who moved around in far greater numbers. We know humans have been building structures for at least 475,000 years. At Kalamba Falls in Zambia, archaeologists discovered a wooden construction, likely a platform or part of a dwelling, dating back to that time, providing the earliest known evidence of human-built architecture. So it's no surprise Neanderthals were more than capable of construction. While Neanderthals primarily used caves and rock shelters as dwellings, which provided protection from the elements and were often strategically located, such as a third of the way up a slope, ideal for safety and visibility, they also constructed shelters in open landscapes. The discovery of the underpinnings of a house built by a group of Neanderthals some 44,000 years ago in modern Ukraine showcases their ability to create living quarters wherever they were. The home was apparently built in two parts. The lower part, or base, was made by assembling large mammoth bones to support the whole structure, which was 26 feet across at its widest. The researchers suggest that the house was once topped by wood or other materials the builders were able to find. Separate areas of activities, such as butchering and tool production, have been excavated inside the house. The Neanderthals who built the structure also obviously lived in it for quite some time, as 25 different hearths were found inside. Perhaps even more interesting was the fact that some of the bones used to build the house had decorative carvings and added pigments, clearly showing that those who built the house were in fact building a home. A post hole found at a Neanderthal site in southern France indicates that Neanderthals may have built crude teepee-like structures made with wood, mammoth bones, and animal hides. More evidence that Neanderthals kept their homes tidy and organized has been confirmed based on excavations at a cave in Italy, where they appear to have purposely organized separate spaces for cooking, butchering, and tool-making. The Abric Romani rock shelter near Barcelona, Spain, was occupied on and off for at least 70,000 years until about 40,000 years ago by Neanderthal people. The shelter was organized with a hearth at the center, a sleeping area with grass bedding near the back wall, and a DIY space for crafting tools, indicating structured use of space. At Tor Faraj in Jordan, around 70,000 years ago, Neanderthals constructed windbreaks by piling stones and wood within a rock shelter to shield themselves from the elements. Later, around 60,000 years ago, similar windbreaks were built in open landscapes, using wood and animal bones, showcasing their ability to adapt and create shelter even in environments lacking natural protection. The most mysterious and extraordinary construction work by the Neanderthals has got to be two 176,000-year-old ring structures, several meters wide, made of broken stalagmite pieces that were discovered in a large chamber more than 300 meters from the entrance within the Grotte de Brunica cave in France. The extraordinary constructions are made from nearly 400 stalagmites that have been yanked from the ground and stacked on top of one another to produce rudimentary walls on the damp cave floor. Parts of the walls show clear signs of fire damage, with the stalagmites blackened or reddened and fractured from the heat, leading researchers to suspect that the Neanderthals embedded fireplaces in the structures to illuminate the cave. The chamber's actual purpose is uncertain. Building complex structures so deep in a cave is unprecedented in the archaeological record and indicates sophisticated lighting and construction technology and great familiarity with subterranean environments. Were the walls built when Neanderthals found themselves deep inside the cave by chance, or was making underground structures a common practice for them? Another remarkable demonstration of their intelligence and social cooperation is the clear evidence of Neanderthal seafaring. 2 decades ago, when excavators claimed to have found stone tools on the Greek island of Crete dating back at least 130,000 years, archaeologists around the world were both surprised and skeptical. However, further research has revealed Neanderthals were indeed Stone Age seafarers. Since Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years, the only way to reach it would have been by some form of early watercraft. The distance from Crete to mainland Greece is about 160 kilometers, so no swimming or floating on a log would have got them there. Since the discovery, Neanderthal artifacts have turned up on a number of islands in the Mediterranean, including at Stolida on the island of Naxos, which sits 250 kilometers north of Crete in the Aegean Sea. Even during glacial times, when sea levels were lower, it was likely accessible only by watercraft. These brave sea crossings would have required thinking ahead, organization, and teamwork. The crafts they used to make it to these islands is unclear, but it has been suggested they could have used reed rafts or dugout canoes made from logs, possibly similar to the Pesek canoe found in the Netherlands, which is one of the oldest known boats. We will likely never know how these boats were built, as they would have been made from wood and other perishable materials that haven't survived over time. All these things the Neanderthals achieved, from house construction to boat building to clothes making and creating art, you would think they must have had some form of language to accomplish this. New anatomical evidence indicates that the Neanderthals had vocal tracts and auditory pathways not significantly different to our own, indicating that, from an anatomical perspective, they were as capable as us at communicating through speech. They also had the FOXP2 gene, which is associated with speech and language development. While it doesn't definitively prove that Neanderthals had language, it does suggest they had some of the necessary biological building blocks. Also, the discovery of Neanderthal genes in our own species indicates multiple episodes of interbreeding, which implies effective interspecies communication and social relationships. A recent 3D digital reconstruction of the Neanderthal brain, created by deforming that of Homo sapiens and fitting it into a cast of the brain from a Neanderthal, indicates significant differences in structure. The Neanderthals had a relatively large occipital lobe, devoting more brain matter to visual processing and making less available for other tasks, such as language. They also had a relatively small and differently shaped cerebrum. This subcortical structure, which is packed with neurons, contributes to many tasks, including language processing, speaking, and fluency. Second is the recognition that iconic sounds, those that provide a sensory impression of a thing they represent, has provided the evolutionary bridge between ape-like calls of our common ancestors of 6 million years ago and the first words spoken by Homo, though we're not sure which species that was. Iconic words remain pervasive in language today, capturing aspects of the sound, size, movement, and texture of the concept the word represents. This contrasts with words that are only arbitrarily related to the thing they refer to. For example, a canine can equally be called a dog, chien, or hund, none of which provide a sensory impression of the animal. Third, computer simulation models of language transmission between generations have shown that syntax, consistent rules for how words are ordered to generate meaning, can spontaneously emerge. This shift of emphasis from genetic encoding of syntax to spontaneous emergence suggests that both Homo sapiens and Neanderthal language contained these rules. Although there might seem to be many ways to piece the puzzle together, years of careful study across many disciplines point to a single answer. The first truly iconic words were likely spoken by Homo erectus, an ancient human species around 1.5 to 2 million years ago. As these types of words were transmitted from generation to generation, arbitrary words and rules of syntax emerged, providing the early Neanderthals and Homo sapiens with equivalent linguistic and cognitive capacities. But these diverged as both species continued to evolve. The Homo sapiens brain developed its spherical form, with neural networks connecting what had been isolated semantic clusters of words. These remained isolated in the Neanderthal brain. So while modern humans and Neanderthals had equivalent capacity for iconic words and syntax, they appear to have differed with respect to storing ideas in semantic clusters in the brain. By linking up different clusters in the brain that are responsible for storing groups of concepts, our species gained the capacity to think and communicate using metaphor. This allowed modern humans to draw a line between widely different concepts and ideas. This was arguably the most important of our cognitive tools, enabling us to come up with complex and abstract concepts. While iconic words and syntax were shared between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, metaphor transformed the language, thought, and culture of our species, creating a deep divide with the Neanderthals. This may be one of the reasons why they went extinct, while we populated the world and continued to flourish. Of all the things Neanderthals created that still resonate with us today, perhaps none is more striking than music. The oldest known musical instrument, a 60,000-year-old flute made from the left thigh bone of a juvenile cave bear, was remarkably crafted by Neanderthals. Discovered in the Dive Barbade cave near Cervno, Slovenia, it predates all known flutes by about 20,000 years. The bone has 4 holes, 2 complete and 1 partial on the back side and 1 partial on the front, all aligned in a straight line along the bone's middle. Tests using metal models of carnivore teeth showed the holes don't match animal bites, supporting human creation. A replica of the bone produced a pentatonic scale across 3.5 octaves, indicating it could play complex music. This supports the idea of Neanderthals having advanced cognitive and symbolic abilities. Neanderthal art, while not as prolific or figurative as later Homo sapiens art, is increasingly recognized as evidence of symbolic thought and artistic expression in Neanderthals. Recent discoveries, particularly in Spain and France, show that Neanderthals created cave paintings and engravings at least 65,000 years ago, predating the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. These artworks include hand stencils, abstract patterns like ladder-shaped designs, and engravings made with fingers on soft cave walls. They include roughly 75,000-year-old cave drawings in France that look like indistinct scratches, ancient cave paintings in Spain that are around 64,000 years old, and 57,000-year-old engravings on a cave wall in France that are the earliest unambiguous evidence of abstract designs by Neanderthals, although archaeologists don't know what the designs meant. Perforated seashell beads and pigment use at Cueva de los Aviones in Spain dates back over 115,000 years. Findings like these demonstrate Neanderthals were capable of creating art long before the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. In May 2025, scientists in Spain uncovered a remarkable 45,000-year-old pebble at the San Lazaro rock shelter in Segovia, Spain. But this wasn't just any pebble. On the surface is what researchers believe to be the oldest known full human fingerprint. A Neanderthal man is thought to have dipped his finger in red pigment and pressed it onto the stone, leaving behind the impression of a painted nose and a striking trace of early symbolic expression. The strategic placement of the dot on a stone with face-like fissures, brought intentionally to the shelter, where red pigment isn't naturally found, supports its artistic purpose. Multi-spectrum analysis by Spain's scientific police confirms the fingerprint. This finding, the first of a red ochre dot in an archaeological context, plus the many known cave art drawings, showcases Neanderthals' complex cognitive abilities and expressive thought. As we know, it wasn't all playing the flute and painting caves. Neanderthals lived lives of frequent traumatic injury and recovery. Well-healed major fractures on many bones indicate the setting of splints. Individuals with severe head and rib traumas, which would have caused massive blood loss, indicate they had some manner of dressing major wounds, such as bandages made from animal skin. By and large, they appear to have avoided severe infections, indicating good long-term treatment of such wounds. Evidence for remarkable survival of Neanderthals who were ill or injured has been recovered since as far back as the mid-19th century. The limited remains of one of the earliest Neanderthals discovered, the Feldhofer Neanderthal or Neanderthal 1 individual, discovered in 1856, demonstrated recovery with likely care from several injuries and illnesses. For example, these included a severe fracture of the left arm and a healed injury to the frontal bone, as well as continued survival with extensive inflammation of the paranasal sinuses and metastatic disease. Care over his lifetime may have included short-term intensive care when injured, accommodation for a lack of movement in the arm in foraging for food, as well as probable care for systemic disease prior to death. He was not alone, with many other Neanderthals displaying a range of severe injuries and pathologies before death. In 2024, scientists from Spain re-examined Neanderthal skull fragments first unearthed at the Cova Negra site in 1989 in Spain, but whose significance has only recently come to light. Despite the fragmentary remains, the fossils preserved the complete inner ear anatomy, which bears the hallmarks of Down syndrome. Although the child lived during one of the most toughest times to be alive, they reached the age of 6. Care for a child with Down syndrome is extremely challenging in modern times, let alone during prehistory. This implies that the child was under the care of other members of the Neanderthal social group besides the mother, showing a high level of social cooperation and, most of all, compassion. Their knowledge of medicinal plants appears to be extremely good and was comparable to that of Cro-Magnons. An individual at Cueva de Cedron, Spain, seems to have been medicating a dental abscess using poplar, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, and there were also traces of the antibiotic-producing Penicillium chrysogenum. Both yarrow, known as an astringent and antiseptic, and chamomile, recognized for its calming and anti-inflammatory effect, have been found in Neanderthal teeth. These plants have a bitter taste that offer little nutritional value, but are known for their medicinal properties, suggesting Neanderthals were aware of these characteristics. For years, it has been well established that Neanderthals had compassion and culture. However, whether they intentionally buried their dead has been a topic of debate for quite some time. The first evidence that Neanderthals buried their dead emerged after archaeologist Ralph Selecki excavated Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq in the 1950s and 1960s. The cave eventually yielded the remains of 10 Neanderthals, including one dubbed Shandidar 4, which was found with clumps of pollen, suggesting the body had been deliberately placed in a grave and flowers scattered on it. However, the flower burial suggestion has been controversial, as there are burrowing rodents that use the cave, and they sometimes take flowers into their burrows. Controversy ensued and still lingers. But over time, it's become increasingly clear that Neanderthals did, at least occasionally, bury their dead. In Kafsar in Israel, some 115,000 years ago, there is evidence of the deliberate burial and positioning of bodies in caves. In one example, the left hand of a buried child had been placed on a deer skull and antlers positioned on the child's neck. Neanderthal burials have also been found in southern France, the northern Balkans, Syria, and Central Asia. New research reveals the burial practices of both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals during the Middle Paleolithic period in the Levant region of Western Asia. The study analyzed 17 Neanderthal and 15 Homo sapiens burial sites. The Levant, encompassing modern-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, served as a critical crossroads during the Middle Paleolithic, with Neanderthals arriving from Europe and Homo sapiens arriving from Africa. Remarkably, it seems, the two species began burying their dead roughly 120,000 years ago, making this practice one of their earliest shared cultural innovations. The simultaneous appearance of burials in both populations suggests a shared cultural origin or parallel innovation. However, the researchers emphasize that these practices likely arose in response to local demographic pressures as population densities increased with the arrival of both species in the resource-rich Levant. The study identified several similarities in burial practices. Both species buried individuals, regardless of age or gender, often accompanied by grave goods, such as animal remains and stone artifacts. Wild goat horns, deer antlers, and red ochre were common in Homo sapiens burials, while Neanderthals included items like tortoise shells and modified limestone. Despite these shared elements, significant differences emerged. Neanderthals primarily buried their dead inside caves, using stones as positional markers or headrests. In contrast, Homo sapiens buried their deceased near cave entrances or rock shelters, often in a fetal-like position. Decorative items, such as seashells, were exclusive to Homo sapiens burials, reflecting a potential symbolic or aesthetic preference absent in Neanderthal contexts. So, while Neanderthals may have buried their dead differently than Homo sapiens, there's little doubt that they practiced deliberate burials. Some researchers suggest that because Neanderthals hunted large and dangerous animals and lived in small groups, they may not have had a clear sexual division of labor like modern hunter-gatherer societies. In other words, men, women, and even children likely participated in hunting, rather than men hunting while women and children focused on gathering. In contrast, modern hunter-gatherers often show a stronger division of labor the more they rely on meat. Interestingly, patterns of tooth wear in Neanderthal remains show differences between males and females. Men tend to have more wear on their upper teeth, while women show more wear on their lower teeth. This suggests they may have performed different tasks, hinting at some level of cultural role differentiation. It is controversially proposed that some Neanderthals wore decorative clothing or jewellery, such as a leopard skin or raptor feathers, to display elevated status in the group. While Neanderthals may have had some form of social hierarchy, it was likely far less complex than that of Homo sapiens. They typically lived in small, family-based groups of around 20 individuals, which makes the development of a highly structured social system unlikely. Evidence of cooperative hunting and caregiving, such as healed injuries and shared tasks, may suggest that group members had organized roles, and perhaps even informal leaders or individuals with higher status. However, due to their small group sizes, Neanderthals probably lacked the complex social structures seen in contemporary Homo sapiens communities. Around 50,000 to 55,000 years ago, the Neanderthal world began to shift. Slender, dark-skinned Homo sapiens had begun entering their lands. Previous studies have suggested that the first modern humans reached the European continent, originally from Africa and via the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean crossroads, between 43,000 and 48,000 years ago. But this discovery of modern human presence in the heart of the Rhone River Valley at Grotamandren points to about 54,000 years ago. It's fascinating to imagine how Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interacted during this time. We know they interbred, and perhaps at times traded or exchanged ideas. But did they also fight, wage war, socialize? Did some Homo sapiens attempt to learn their language? Could a few even have integrated into Neanderthal groups, forming mixed communities? While these possibilities spark endless curiosity, without some extraordinary archaeological discovery in the future, we'll probably never know for sure. Back to the point of us killing the Neanderthals off when we made it into Europe, some evidence suggests Neanderthal populations were already declining before Homo sapiens even arrived. So the question remains, why did the Neanderthals go extinct? The extinction of the Neanderthals has been debated for decades, and if one thing is clear, it's that there wasn't a single cause, but rather a combination of contributing factors. A study conducted earlier this year, in 2025, published in Nature Communications, suggests that Neanderthal extinction goes back to 110,000 years ago, when Neanderthals went through a severe population bottleneck. A study of the inner ear bones of Neanderthals shows a significant loss of diversity in their shape around this time, suggesting a genetic bottleneck that contributed to Neanderthals' decline. Using CT scans, the researchers examined the semicircular canals of 30 Neanderthals from 3 time periods. 13 from the site of Cima de los Huesos in Spain that were dated to 430,000 years ago, 10 from the site of Krapina in Croatia that were dated to 120,000 years ago, and 7 late Neanderthals from France, Belgium, and Israel that were dated to 64,000 to 40,000 years ago. This analysis revealed that the group of late Neanderthals had significantly lower variation in their inner ear bones than the earlier groups did, which led the researchers to conclude that a genetic bottleneck event occurred more recently than 120,000 years ago. Another thing that's certain is that traces of Neanderthals disappear around 40,000 years ago. Causes of their extinction include climate change, natural catastrophes, competitive replacement, inbreeding, parasites and pathogens, modern humans' alliances with dogs, and even the magnetic reversal of Earth's magnetic field. Whether it's asteroid impact or changing global temperatures, changes in the environment have been the leading cause of extinction throughout natural history. It might have also been an integral factor in the demise of the Neanderthals. Neanderthals lived during the last ice age. This was a period marked by dramatic oscillation between cold and warmer glacial periods. And archaeological analysis shows particularly harsh cold snaps may have coincided with Neanderthal population decline. These events would have caused significant changes in the availability of vegetation, transforming the open woodlands Neanderthals favored into less hospitable environments. The shift would have significantly impacted the populations of large herbivores, including mammoths and woolly rhinos, that were a mainstay of the Neanderthal diet. Faced with rapidly shifting landscapes and the changing availability of essential resources, Neanderthals might have struggled to adapt, leading to dwindling populations and the knock-on effects of that. Dovetailing with encroaching competition from Homo sapiens, the changing climate seems likely to have imposed the fate of extinction on Neanderthals. A number of researchers have argued that the companion ignimbrite eruption, a volcanic eruption near Naples, Italy, about 39,500 years ago, erupting about 200 cubic kilometers of magma, contributed to the extinction of Neanderthals. The eruption ejected a vast amount of magma and ash, covering an area of at least 7,000 square kilometers. Studies of sediment layers at Mezhmaiskaya Cave in southwestern Russia suggest a severe reduction of plant pollen. The damage to plant life would have led to a corresponding decline in plant-eating mammals hunted by the Neanderthals. No Neanderthal remains have ever been found after this event. We know that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals shared the same landscape for thousands of years, and it's likely they competed for resources like food and territory. While not a million miles apart, Homo sapiens seem to have possessed certain cognitive and social advantages, such as more complex social structures and better communication that allowed them to adapt and secure resources more effectively. Jared Diamond, a supporter of competitive replacement, points out in his book The Third Chimpanzee that the replacement of Neanderthals by modern humans is comparable to patterns of behavior that occur whenever people with advanced technology clash with people with less developed technology. One theory suggests that Homo sapiens killed their Neanderthal siblings unwittingly by spreading into Neanderthal territory, carrying diseases that the Neanderthal immune system had never been exposed to. Homo sapiens were less vulnerable to Neanderthal diseases, partly because they had evolved to cope with the far higher disease load of the tropics, and so were more able to cope with novel pathogens, and partly because the higher numbers of Homo sapiens meant that even devastating outbreaks would have still left enough survivors for a viable population. The catastrophic impact of Eurasian viruses on Native American populations in the historical past offers a sense of how modern humans may have affected hominin predecessor groups in Eurasia 40,000 years ago. In the late 20th century New Guinea, the Four Peoples' cannibalistic funerary practices spread kuru, a deadly prion disease. However, individuals with the 129 variant of the PRNP gene were naturally immune to the prions. Studying this gene led to the discovery that the 129 variant was widespread among all modern humans, which could indicate widespread cannibalism at some point in human prehistory. British paleoanthropologist Simon Underdown theorizes that modern humans, coexisting with Neanderthals who also practice cannibalism, may have transmitted a similar disease to Neanderthals who lacked the 129 variant, potentially contributing to their extinction. According to a 2019 study, kinship patterns among recovered Neanderthal remains suggest that there was interbreeding, such as pairings between half-siblings and/or uncle-aunt and niece-nephew. Researchers hypothesize that Neanderthals may have become isolated into small groups during harsh climatic conditions, which contributed to interbreeding behaviors. Due to the lack of genetic diversity, Neanderthal populations would have become more vulnerable to climatic changes, diseases, and other stresses, which may have contributed to their extinction. A similar model to the inbreeding hypothesis can be seen among endangered lowland gorillas. Their populations are so small that it has caused inbreeding, making them even more vulnerable to extinction. Since Svante Pääbo sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, we've known that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred. With Homo sapiens having significantly larger populations, this interbreeding likely contributed to Neanderthals being gradually absorbed into the human gene pool. Over time, frequent interbreeding could have eroded the distinct Neanderthal population, leading to their extinction as a separate group. Pat Shipman argues that the domestication of the dog gave modern humans an advantage when hunting. Evidence shows the oldest remains of domesticated dogs were found in Belgium 31,700 years ago and in Siberia 33,000 years ago. A survey of early sites of modern humans and Neanderthals with faunal remains across Spain, Portugal and France provided an overview of what modern humans and Neanderthals ate. Rabbit and other small game became more frequent, while large mammals, mainly eaten by the Neanderthals, became increasingly rare. This suggests that modern humans, aided by dogs, adapted more flexibly to changing environmental conditions, giving them a competitive edge of Neanderthals who were less adaptable in their hunting practices. Some researchers have even suggested that the Lachamps geomagnetic excursion, a short reversal of Earth's magnetic field around 41,000 years ago, may have contributed to the extinction of the Neanderthals. The excursion caused a weakening of the intensity of the magnetic field, which protects Earth from harmful radiation, including ultraviolet radiation, which is dangerous to humans. It is argued that modern humans may have been less susceptible to the radiation's damaging effect than Neanderthals because they used ochre as a sun shield and wore tailored clothing, which provides more protection than the Neanderthals' simple draped clothing. Whether or not one of these factors played a bigger role than another remains disputed. However, it brings researchers closer to understanding the truth behind when, why, and how Neanderthals ultimately faced extinction. Given that Neanderthal DNA still exists in all humans today, ranging from about 0.5 to 6% of our genome, one could argue that Neanderthals never truly went extinct. In fact, around 20% of the Neanderthal genome still survives today, scattered across the global human population. Neanderthals didn't simply vanish. Instead, their descendants gradually inherited more and more modern human DNA through interbreeding, and their genetic legacy still affects us. Studies have shown that Neanderthal genes influence traits such as skin tone, hair color, immune system responses, and even susceptibility to certain diseases like type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, and lupus. There are also links between Neanderthal DNA and neurological and psychiatric conditions, including depression and autism, as well as traits like pain sensitivity and even smoking behavior. It's worth noting that all the Neanderthal DNA present in modern humans comes from male Neanderthals. There's no evidence of any surviving offspring from female Neanderthals and male Homo sapiens. This could be due to genetic incompatibility between the two species, or perhaps because Neanderthal mothers stayed within Neanderthal communities and their children didn't survive after Neanderthals went extinct. We know this because there is no Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA in the modern human genome. Since mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mothers, this tells us that no Neanderthal woman ever had descendants who made it to the present day. In contrast, all the Neanderthal DNA we carry today came from male Neanderthals who had children with Homo sapiens women. This interbreeding didn't happen just once. It occurred multiple times over tens of thousands of years. One estimate suggests there was, on average, one successful Neanderthal-human pairing every 77 generations. The Neanderthal genes that survived in us mostly influence traits like skin tone, hair color, and immune system function. On the other hand, very little Neanderthal DNA is found in regions of the human genome related to the brain and male reproductive system. This suggests that these areas were where Neanderthals and modern humans were most different, and where Neanderthal genes were less likely to be compatible with the human genome. In conclusion, Neanderthals were a remarkable species, thriving for around 400,000 years across diverse and often harsh environments shared with fearsome predators. Their sophisticated toolmaking, exemplified by the finely crafted Mousterian and Châteauperonian tools, and their adept hunting strategies showcased their intelligence and cooperation. Evidence of seafaring suggests they were capable of navigating the seas, while their mastery of fire provided warmth, protection, and the ability to cook, enhancing their survival. Neanderthals also expressed a rich cultural life, creating jewelry from shells and bones, and producing art such as cave paintings and engravings that hint at their symbolic thinking. Their resilience allowed them to endure ice ages and compete with other species. Yet, despite their success, Neanderthals faced a gradual decline in the late Pleistocene. Whether outcompeted by modern humans, impacted by climate shifts and natural events, or absorbed through interbreeding, their legacy endures in our DNA and the archaeological record. The story of the Neanderthals is not one of failure, but of a resilient people who shaped the ancient world and left an everlasting mark on our own.